So African countries are living beyond their means. There's a lot of research to suggest that a lot of this demand is coming from civil servants who have preferential credit access and who are not using those funds for productive purposes.
Among the string of challenges facing the African continent, a dollar shortage is among them. To discuss this, I'm joined by our co-head of our African desk here at ETM, Danny Greef. Danny, thank you very much for joining me. So we see this liquidity crunch playing out across several markets in Africa at the moment and causing severe problems. But I just want to start at how do we get here?
So the liquidity crunch came to the fore during the pandemic when export earnings across Africa were reduced significantly just due to lower trade globally. This reduced African countries' ability to raise hard currency, and which was then exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, which increased import prices of core commodities significantly. This, of course, worsened the trade imbalances across the continent. Of course, there's a monetary aspect as the world's developed market central banks have been hiking interest rates to fight inflation over the last 2 to 3 years, which reduced liquidity out of the global financial system significantly. And then there's also a fiscal aspect with a lot of Africa's debts denominated in foreign currency. So as their currencies weakened, the debt increased, but also a lot of productive resources that could be put to productive use were then misallocated or allocated towards repaying back debt or interest payments, which also drew a lot of liquidity out of the system.
By it, the big economies, Kenya, Nigeria, even countries like Egypt, especially though, the countries in West Africa, we're seeing them particularly struggling with this matter. And we see countries coming to the fore with solutions. They're trying everything. A couple of them have went the devaluation of their currency route to try and lure investors and exporters to give that foreign aid. We see them going into the bond market with extra issuance. But are these solutions sustainable? Is it something that could resolve this matter?
So you mentioned countries now re-entering the bond markets after 2 years of sitting on the sidelines, and that's a sign of confidence that external financing conditions should begin to improve maybe into the end of the year and through next year. But Africa's liquidity crunch has a structural aspect to it. There's a lack of hard currency generating activity on the continent, which won't go away. So while things might improve, and this has set the stage for a lot of reforms across the continent, which is of course welcome, the structural aspect will remain until Africa can generate more hard currency through productive economic activity and trade, and attract capital from the rest of the world, or by changing policy making such that borrowing from multilateral lenders becomes cheaper. So the structural issues will remain.
So we've spoken a lot about the dollar shortage on the continent, right? But that automatically implies that there must be a great demand coming from somewhere. Is it just from industries, corporate importers? Where's this great demand coming from?
So African countries are living beyond their means. There's a lot of research to suggest that a lot of this demand is coming from civil servants who have preferential credit access and who are not using those funds for productive purposes. So increasing imports into African countries and therefore reducing the liquidity that is available for imports, which just exacerbates the general trade imbalances in these countries.
And we also know the central bank governor, was it from Nigeria, right?
Yes.
Fired a warning shot?
Yes, so 2 weeks ago the governor mentioned that for all the reforms that they've been implementing to work on a sustainable basis, they need to also decrease liquidity demand in Nigeria, because all of these reforms are focusing on increasing the supply of liquidity, but he did fire a warning shot, as you say, to the civil servants to effectively to reduce their demand for this to work.
And to import fancy things from overseas.
Yes.
But we spoke about them now, and you mentioned again the African markets, the African states making decisions to go to the bond market. And when we saw what Kenya did, there was an interest of $5 billion when they went to market. So does it mean that there's at least appetite for these African bonds that they are making available?
Yes, certainly. There's definitely appetite. In due time, the search for yield will be reignited globally as interest rates in the developed world and in lower risk markets begin to decrease. But the reason for the borrowing in Africa is still unfortunate. It's not necessarily going to go into productive economic activity.
Yes.
A lot of it is to repay other loans or to repay, bond payments that that are coming due. So it's not all necessarily going to be productive or put to productive use. But there's certainly appetite, which is positive. Especially after the last 2-3 years where African countries were completely locked out of the global bond market. So, yeah, definitely a positive.
So at least things are changing. Danny, thanks very much for joining me.